For those of you without the patience for a longer review, I'll give you a short one. That's all you need to know. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is Quentin Tarantino's 9th film, I believe. Yes, his 9th. He says that he's only going to make 10 because he says that there's nothing worse than an out-of-touch director. I would tend to agree with him. There are a few directors out there that make a few films that aren't exactly up to the same par that they have always done. Him being one of them. This might be a bit of a controversial opinion, but I think that Quentin Tarantino really peaked maybe a few years ago. Either that or he's just deciding to make movies that have a bit more of a slow burn feel to them. I mean, The Hateful Eight definitely had its moments of being really awesome, but at the same time I just felt like it was so oversaturated with how amazing Quentin thought that he was at being a writer. Like the opening scene alone in The Hateful Eight, it contains maybe like 15, 20 minutes of dialogue that I suppose have something to do with building the character, but not necessarily building the story. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, that's probably just some kind of screenplay technique. It's just that it makes for a specific mood that you have to be in order to enjoy the movie. There is no longer the expectation of going into a Quentin Tarantino film that you are going to be, blown away with all this cool, awesome music and editing, and there's going to be blood everywhere, even though there's definitely blood in The Hateful Eight, and definitely in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But now I guess it's more so he has a certain pace of just getting to know the characters. I mean, that's literally what you're doing for most of The Hateful Eight, and especially in this one, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There's a scene in this movie where one of the characters goes into his trailer home, interacts with his dog a lot, opens up a few cans of dog food, and throws it into a dog dish, and then has a cigarette and watches a TV show. That's the whole scene. And it lasts for about 5 minutes. This is not at all what modern audiences are used to. Not at all. But because it's Quentin Tarantino, he can kind of pull it off. He can make it kind of cute and kind of endearing. And seeing as how it's in the beginning of the movie, you understand that, okay, this is more just like building the character. You getting to know this character. And again, it's not necessarily moving the story forward. It's a different way of watching movies, but because it's Tarantino, it kind of works. He has said that once he retires from making movies, he wants to be a novelist, which maybe he's already gone into that to a certain extent. The Hateful Eight and this one are much more plotting. They're much more like, let's sit here in this scene, let's let it marinate, even though that phrase in and of itself is so goofy and kind of stupid, but I suppose it applies in this situation. The Hateful Eight had moments that were just pure Tarantino, just 100% gold. They were those moments that had a setup that was very quick but very effective, and a great payoff at the end, only about 5 or 10 minutes later, kind of like a little vignette within a movie. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has a couple of those as well. Probably the best being a scene involving Bruce Lee, which after I looked up this particular scene, apparently it's very controversial, considering the way that the actor has portrayed Bruce Lee, or maybe more specifically, the way Tarantino asked the actor to play Bruce Lee. But being the not-too-bright guy that I am, I didn't even realize that it was Bruce Lee that was being portrayed on screen. I just thought it was some kind of, stereotypical Asian actor who was playing some kind of kung fu master. And there were definitely a bit of stereotypes in this particular role. But the scene itself is pretty awesome. I love tracking shots. Tracking shots are just it's like one of the greatest examples of skill for making a movie. Because as a director, you have to block and set up so much. As an actor, you have to remember all your lines, and you have to remember where you're supposed to stand. And it's really tough for the cameraman, as well as the cinematographer and the lighter. I mean, everyone involved. It's just really hard to do tracking shots, which is why they're such a big deal when they actually happen. And in this scene, when it was Bruce Lee versus Brad Pitt's character, the stuntman, was, I would say, probably a 5 to 6 minute tracking shot. It might have even been longer. It was played for a lot of laughs, and it was just really fun to watch, especially towards the end of this particular scene. So that alone might be worth the price of the ticket. The movie has a very consistent mood of kind of getting into what it's like to be a Hollywood star. There's a lot of commentary on suddenly being irrelevant. One day you are, an A-list actor, you're going along, and then suddenly the public, their interests shift. They don't care about you anymore. And it's not that they don't care about you, they just don't care what you represent. They don't care about the TV show that you've been so famous for. They don't care about this movie that you've been in for so long. And that's one of the hard things about being an actor, is that you have to adapt. You have to roll with the changing tastes, and especially in 2019 when it seems like tastes live and die by the hour. So that was one part of the movie that I really enjoyed. it has that consistent tone throughout the film, and then towards the end, it is vintage Tarantino. And by vintage, I mean a absurd and obnoxious amount of violence. I've seen all of Tarantino movies except for Jackie Brown. I'm getting around to it, don't worry. And the level of violence is something that you kind of expect. However, you do expect it at more of a parody type level. You expect it to just kind of be like cartoony. I mean, in Kill Bill, like when the guy gets his head chopped off, the blood comes out like a fountain. I mean, you laugh at that. And Tarantino himself has defended how much violence there is in movies. He says that it's a fantasy. It's not real life. And he plays the blood out like a fantasy. Except in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The violence in this last scene, like, had me retracting in my chair. And I'm no stranger to violence in films. It doesn't really bother me that much. Or it doesn't bother me at all, I would say. But the realism by which Tarantino shot this violent scene had me just like... It was like watching a car crash. It's a horrifying event, and you can't really look away. Not to say that it was a bad scene by any means. I think that it was an excellently done scene. It was also vintage Tarantino. I mean, I'm kind of abusing that word at this point, but it was consistent build-up and an awesome release of tension. He does that so well. Most brilliantly in Inglourious Basterds, one of my most favorite movies of all time. It's just that it was a little bit jarring to experience about 2 hours and 20 minutes of this slow burn where you just kind of are sitting in the heart of Hollywood and you're absorbing all of the culture and all of the problems that come along with it. It set this really great mood, very convincing. But then suddenly it just becomes this bloodbath. Like the last 20 minutes is just absolute carnage. So a little weird, but at the same time, very effective. This is probably DiCaprio's best role. And no, DiCaprio has never deserved an Oscar. But if he were to win an Oscar, it would either be for this or Wolf of Wall Street. If we were to, give him his petty Oscar at any other point, it would probably be, if I were to, someone had a gun to my head, if one of his fanboys had a gun to my head, I would probably say either Wolf of Wall Street or this one, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He's always played this cool, very self-assured type of character, but in this one, he's very insecure, and he actually plays it off extremely well. That is one thing that I love about Leo, is that he's not... he's been a leading man ever since he came out of the womb. Ever since he came out of the womb, he's always been good looking, he's always been charismatic, he's always been cool, but he's still humble. Like, you see interviews with him, he's very just kind of like, yeah, I'm just doing my thing, and there are other people out there doing their thing, and I'm lucky to be here, etc. To be able to see him play a actor that is washed up, and or feels like he's being washed up, was very impressive. Whenever you have an actor playing an actor, kind of like in Birdman, it's this cool level of meta that you didn't really expect, but it's a lot of fun to watch. Brad Pitt does a great job as well. I'm glad that we're living in an era where he is past his sort of pretty boy phase, and he can play more serious things, even though there is a scene that kind of like gratuitously shows off his body. I didn't really think it was necessary. There was this, I thought that she was a middle-aged woman, but after the movie was over, I saw that she was like in her early 20s, was sitting about 2 seats over from me, and when this scene happens when Brad Pitt takes his shirt off, the woman was like, "Yes, please." I gotta admit, he looks pretty darn good for the age that he is, so who can blame her? But Brad Pitt does a great job. He plays a man who's high really well. There's a scene where he is tripping, and he does it so convincingly that you would have thought, I know what, I bet Tarantino gave him something to help him along with that. Tarantino has sometimes been accused of his use of music in movies, or specifically how he uses music. The Hateful Eight had some pretty awesome music, but in other movies he's been accused of like the fact that the songs abruptly cut off for no reason, and I'm kind of in that boat a little bit. There wasn't really much of that at all in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, so I think the music really added to this period piece, which I think it is, and sort of allowed you to delve even further into the atmosphere. Going back to the A-list actors, Margot Robbie is in this movie. I felt like she could have been utilized a bit more, but I mean, she kills it in whatever roles that she's in. I mean, I honestly haven't seen anything by her that was before Wolf of Wall Street, but that was kind of like her big break. Like, that was kind of what propelled her into this, star status. And everything after that, I mean, she's amazing. Yes, even in Suicide Squad. There's also this one scene where DiCaprio's character is talking to this little girl, and he asks her, what is she reading? And she said, I'm reading an autobiography of Walt Disney. The man was a genius, like a once-in-a-lifetime genius. So shout out to Tarantino for writing that, because Kudos to you, sir. I couldn't agree more. I'm glad you gave a little nod to Disney, even if it's in a Tarantino film. If you're a fan of Tarantino, you will absolutely love this film. If you're not so much, if you don't know who he is, you might find this to be a bit confusing, but ultimately the payoff is good. It's a little bit like Blade Runner 2049. I've only seen that once. I know, I really need to see it again. But even though that movie was 3 hours long, by the time it was over, first of all, I was never bored. Secondly, once it was over, I had this itch to watch it again, even though at times it took a little bit of effort to keep going. In the same way with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, there were a few times where I was sitting there just like, okay, where is this going? And like, I know this is kind of Tarantino-y and I like it, but like, come on. But at the end, I had this urge to watch it again. So, take that for what you will. And I'm giving this one an 8.0 out of 10. So what is your favorite Tarantino movie? Mine is probably either Inglourious Basterds or Pulp Fiction. Whatever it is for you, let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next cinematic adventure.